and said, there's a format that's happening all over the country where you go out and just talk with the audience.
Roy Clark was the type of entertainer who could make a room seem lighter with a simple smile. To admirers, he was the laughing heart of Hee Haw, a banjo prodigy whose fingers moved quicker than the eye could see. His life on stage appeared to be a non-stop stream of music, jokes, and applause. But upon his death in 2018, a bombshell emerged, one that no amount of charm or melody could have prepared his family for. While sorting through his Tulsa house, they came into a small, unassuming closet hidden in his private music room. There was no key, no label, and no apparent reason for being there. At least none that they were aware of. Roy had kept it locked for decades and never explained why. When the family eventually opened it, the atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. What was inside was more than just a collection of personal mementos. It was a portal into a world Roy had never discussed with anyone, a side of him that even those closest to him were unaware existed. And the truth behind that closet door would permanently alter their memories of him. Roy Clark's life began far from the bright lights of television studios and packed concert halls. He was born in 1933 in the small village of Meherrin, Virginia, to a tobacco farmer who also played the violin at neighborhood gatherings. Money was limited, but music permeated the Clark household like a second language. By the time Roy was a teenager, he could transition between guitar, banjo, and fiddle with such speed and perfection that elder players were taken aback. At 14, he was already gaining a reputation in small-town competitions. At 17, he had won national banjo championships. But while his fingers told one story, his eyes occasionally spoke another. Friends recall Roy going quiet in the middle of a party, as if a private idea had drawn him away. As fame found him, so did the pressures that accompanied it. The demands were relentless. Late-night shows, early morning rehearsals, weeks on the road with no time off. He became known as the man who never declined a show. It made no difference whether you were sick or grieving. The curtain would raise and Roy would give the audience every ounce of his energy. But underneath the friendliness, there was a guardedness that few could penetrate. Those closest to him noted minor quirks, rooms in his house that he never let anyone into, closets that stayed shut year after year. When asked, he'd flash that renowned grin and crack a joke about keeping additional banjos or secret cornbread recipes. The joke would land, the laughter would begin, and the questions would recede. Still, there was one cupboard in his music room that piqued his interest over the years. Always closed, always off limits. Roy made it obvious to his wife that it was best left that way. Whatever he put in there, he kept to himself, until he couldn't anymore. Roy's private music area was decorated with instruments, gold records, and framed mementos from his background in show business. But tucked away in the far corner was something that didn't match with the open, welcoming atmosphere. A narrow wooden door practically concealed by a stack of amplifiers. It was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, and the majority of visitors never spotted it. Those who did were met with the same simple deflection. "Oh, that?" Roy would joke, strumming his banjo to change the subject. Over the years, the closet has become a silent fixture in the room. Nobody recalls ever seeing it open. Not his kids, not his close friends. Not even Barbara, his wife of more than 60 years. She believed it contained old contracts, fragile instruments, and possibly stage costumes, nothing worth delving into. But after Roy died, that door was impossible to ignore. The family was confident that the key was somewhere in the house. They searched drawers, guitar cases, and desk shelves until discovering it in the lining of a velvet guitar case, small, brass, and weighted with history. The time has come to discover what Roy had been hiding. The key turned with a hesitant click, as if the lock had not moved in years. When the door opened, the family expected to find a tangle of forgotten stage clothing or crates of dusty sheet music. Instead, they discovered something much more purposeful. Everything was carefully put inside. Cardboard boxes labeled in Roy's handwriting, manila envelopes tied with string, and magnetic tape reels stacked like personal archives. Nothing seemed random. The closet seems to have been curated and preserved for a specific reason. While sorting through the shelves, someone discovered an unusual seam in the wooden paneling at the back. A delicate push revealed a concealed compartment, a secret within a secret. Tucked inside was a little sealed box with aged but stubborn metal hinges. With no key in sight, they forced the door open. Inside were images that had never been seen before. Roy is standing behind a military aircraft. Roy shakes hands with a man in military. Roy, unsmiling, clothed in clothing from decades ago. These were not showbiz moments. They were personable and even official-looking. And beneath the images was a sealed package labeled in shaky handwriting, "For my family, only after I'm gone." The room became still. Nobody realized what they were about to uncover. They gathered around the package, unsure whether to open it immediately or wait until they were ready. Curiosity won. Inside found a solitary cassette tape with the scribbled label, "Play Alone." The words alone made the air in the room feel heavier. Barbara found one of Roy's old reel-to-reel decks from beneath a dusty shelf, which was still plugged in after so many years. She placed the tape into position and hit play, but all she heard was static for a few seconds. Then came his voice, older, slower, and worn with age. "If you're hearing this," Roy said, "then I've already left. I have something to tell you that I couldn't say when I was alive." The room froze. This was not a performance. This was a confession. He discussed the cost of celebrity, such as faded friendships and the continual need to smile even when the world felt heavy. Then his voice became quieter, almost trembling. "There is someone you do not know. Ellie. She was the only one I could talk to when the lights went out. She knew everything." Roy didn't say who she was, just that she had helped him get over a sorrow he never talked about. A night that changed his life forever. "I made a choice," he replied calmly, "and someone else paid for it." The tape played for 25 minutes, with each statement chipping away at the man they thought they knew. By the time it came to a halt, the silence in the room was louder than his voice. The cassette had left them unsettled, but what happened next would only raise more issues. A bundle of letters was found in the bottom of one of the labeled boxes, between two folders of ancient sheet music. Each was stored in a clear plastic sleeve, the edges yellowing with age. Many had Roy's handwriting, but others were signed simply Ellie. There is no last name. There's no return address. The initial letters were written in the 1960s on torn notebook paper and hotel stationery. Some were brief, containing only a few lines. Others stretched across several pages, their tone intimate but guarded, as if the two were communicating in a clandestine code that only they understood. One from Ellie read, "You were correct not to inform them. The world would not comprehend. The stage would never have forgiven you." Another, dated years later, stated, "Do not carry this alone. It was not your fault. We did what we felt was correct." Roy's responses indicated a guy battling unrelenting guilt. In one, he wrote, "I've built a life out of laughter, but the inside still echoes. I can still hear the tires. I can still see his face." Barbara was speechless when she heard the words, tires, his face. She had no recollection of an accident and no story that matched the tone of the letters. They dug deeper and discovered an envelope buried in the interior of an old guitar case. Inside was a black and white image of a teen boy clutching a mandolin. On the back, Roy's unmistakable handwriting reads, "If only I had driven." Ellie sent another letter. "He looked up to you. He absolved you. Why cannot you forgive yourself?" The more they read, it became evident that Ellie was more than simply a buddy. She had been Roy's lifeline, the only person he could trust with the weight of a tragedy that the rest of the world had no idea existed. These were not fan letters or professional contact. They were confessions exchanged back and forth for decades. And together, they created a portrait of Roy Clark that few had ever seen. A guy whose laughter was constantly tinged with darkness. A locked black case nestled beneath the stack of letters in a corner of the closet. The leather was old, and the brass locks were stiff from decades of usage. When they eventually opened it, expecting to find another collection of photographs or trophies, they discovered something unexpected. Rows of reel-to-reel tapes labeled in Roy's familiar handwriting. However, they lacked album titles and performance dates. Instead, the labels included enigmatic statements like "The Other Side," "Wrong Stage," "One Just Reads Midnight." Curious, the family placed one on the reel deck. Before Roy's voice could be heard, there was a slight hum in the room. Not the polished, booming voice that captivated millions, but something softer, bare. He started singing, his guitar barely accompanying the melody. The lyrics were unlike anything he had previously recorded publicly. One song described a lonely trip on a rain-slick road in Tennessee, headlights cutting through the darkness. It never mentioned a crash, but the imagery was clear. Another song, "Shadow in the Mirror," described a man who was unable to look himself in the eye. "Every laugh I gave them," he recounted, "stole a piece of me." There were no fancy banjo runs or studio overdubs, just raw emotion that hung heavily in the air. Some of the videos were made during Roy's peak years, when the world saw him at his most successful. TV specials, sold-out tours, and awards. However, in these recordings, he sounded like a man unraveling. On one recording, his voice trembled between lyrics as he mumbled nearly to himself, "No one will hear this, but I had to get it out or I'd drown." The most disturbing tape appeared last. There was no music, just Roy speaking into the microphone. "I kept these locked away because I didn't want to tarnish what people loved," he told me. "They wanted the banjo and smiles. But this is the man behind it all." Then came quiet, not static, silence so complete that the room seemed smaller. These were not intended for release. They were therapeutic. They served as Roy's personal mirror. And now, decades later, his family was hearing the voice of a guy they had never really known. A battered military briefcase was pushed against the closet's back wall, hidden beneath a folded velvet cover. It was heavier than it appeared, and the metal felt chilly on their hands. Roy had never mentioned serving in the military to anyone in the family, so the sight of it was unexpected. Inside, they discovered official-looking documents stamped United States Air Force. There was a photograph of Roy in his early 20s, standing by a C-47 cargo jet with a guitar slung over his shoulder. His demeanor was solemn and almost grim. There were mission logs in his meticulous handwriting from visits to Korea, Japan, and Guam in the early 1950s. He wasn't identified as a soldier. Instead, he appeared to be a member of a morale unit that was flown into bases near active battle zones to perform music for the troops. However, several entries seemed weird. Entire areas were blocked out. One notation stated that the set was played under blackout conditions. Enemy fire can be heard from East Ridge. Then followed a name marked in red ink, Ellis Raymond. Next to it, gone. The room became quiet. Could this be the man in the photo? Was this the tragedy Roy had been carrying for so long? A single envelope sat at the bottom of the closet. jammed under the military briefcase. It was yellowed with age, sealed solely with tape, and labeled in Roy's handwriting, "Forgive." Barbara turned it over in her hands for a long time before opening it. Inside was an old newspaper clipping from 1968. The headline read, "Two cars collide on rain-slick Tennessee road, killing one." The victim was identified as Ellis Raymond, a 23-year-old Nashville mandolin player. The name of the surviving driver was never published. Roy scrawled in the margin, "I should have been driving." A message was folded underneath the clipping, the ink fading and the penmanship unsteady. We had just finished the set. He claimed he was too sleepy, but I insisted we drive home. I let him drive so I could close my eyes for 5 minutes. I awoke at the hospital. He did not wake up at all. Barbara's hands trembled when she discovered the link. Ellis was the man in the shot, and Ellie, whom Roy had written to over the years, must have been someone close to him. A sister, a fiancée. Suddenly, the cassette, letters, and songs made sense. Roy had spent his life smiling in public while quietly bearing the crushing weight of that night. Guilt had molded his music, his guardedness, and even his insatiable need to entertain. When the final box was opened and the final letter was read, the Clark family found themselves in a new home. The walls and furniture remained the same, but the man they thought they knew had altered permanently in their minds. Roy Clark was a legend around the world, known as the face of Hee Haw, a musical genius, and a maestro of laughter and charm. But behind every grin and standing ovation was a guy who was silently hanging on to sadness, guilt, and memories too painful to reveal. The closet had not been used for storage. It had served as a shelter, a vault for the aspects of himself that he couldn't express elsewhere. The facts did not discredit him in their eyes. It intensified their feelings for him. His capacity to convey joy despite carrying such darkness demonstrated the strength of his spirit. They elected to leave the closet door open as a reminder, rather than for exhibition, that behind every public grin there could be a story nobody sees. And perhaps by sharing his, Roy's family might help others let go of their own ghosts. If Roy's unreported story impacted you, please share this video to ensure that his truth and his music live on.